one of the things that you'll see, and a lot of talk in 2018 was about the blue wave. And what we're actually calling 2020 is the surge. And it's not the 90s Mountain Dew knockoff drink, but rather a pretty closing of the gap when it comes to Republican and Democrat participation in primary elections. A secret that you may or may not know is that the majority of elections in Arizona have a Republican advantage, particularly in the primary. For the last 10 years or so, it's been a fairly Republican affair where the ballots requested in any given primary election are about 60% Republican, about 60% Democrat. We've seen that fall pretty significantly when it comes to ballot share over the last 2 cycles. Democrat participation was up 40% from 16 to 18, and then another 32% from 18 to 20. So that narrowed the gap to basically 52 to 48. And when you go on to the next one, what you actually see is the margin is closing. And so much more competitive races this primary season, which is what we'll talk about when we overall look at what we see for the next legislative session when we get to that piece here. But really, we do see these numbers coming together, and that's what the surge is. I think it's important to note that Republicans still over-participate in this election, and turnout was up. In fact, when you go to the next slide here, what you can see is that turnout was up across the board. The difference is Republicans pretty much always participate in our primaries. It just comes down to who turns out around them. So they had about a 7% increase in this last election, but Democrats, as I said, had a 30% increase. And we also saw independents in the primary had a 23% increase. And you can look at what type of ballot an independent can request. That's one of the things that you see in a primary is that independents have a choice of requesting a Republican ballot, a Democrat ballot, or a nonpartisan ballot. What we saw is by about an 8-point margin, independents are leaning towards Democrats going into this November election, with 50% requesting a Democrat ballot compared to 42% requesting a Republican ballot, and then about 8% or so requesting a nonpartisan ballot. So what does that mean for 2020? When we go on to the next slide, what we anticipate, and I think Chad would agree with this, is that we are expecting much higher than usual turnout. And what the zigzag here shows you is that there's actually a pretty significant difference between a presidential election and a midterm election. And it's been up and down the last few years. 2 years ago was the second highest midterm election in state history, but it's still lower than usual turnout. What we see in a presidential affair is somewhere in the 70 to 77% range. We think that it's going to be as high as 79% and may have a chance of exceeding the record. So going on to the next one here, what we look at is we think this is going to likely be the first time in state history that we exceed 3 million votes total cast in the state of Arizona in this upcoming election. Now, there are over 5 million adults over the age of 18 in the state. So that means, still, just bear in mind, there are about 2 million folks, adults, in the state that are likely to stay home in November. Some of them are not registered to vote. Some of them just won't participate. 79% still means that there's a portion of the electorate that doesn't show up to vote. So that's 500,000 more votes than we saw 4 years ago, which means there will be a lot of ballots to count on election day and thereafter, the ballots that are dropped off. If you think 2018 was bad on how long it took to count those ballots, just bear in mind that that's going to happen again. It's going to take a while for those ballots. Those are valid votes, and I'm sure we'll talk about vote by mail at some point during this discussion. The highest we ever had was 80.1% in 1980. I think we have a chance of meeting or exceeding that, but that was Ronald Reagan. That was an optimistic cycle. Currently, based on if you saw any more than 5 seconds of the debate, I would dare I say not in an optimistic cycle right now, which tends to suppress voter turnout, not raise it up. So we still think it's going to be much higher than usual, and I'm sure we'll talk about where that came from over the course, but we're not sure if it will reach 80%. And we do know that the Republican advantage will be much lower than usual. So two things to note real quick. Next on the next slide, just that Maricopa County makes up, okay, so voter registration. Maricopa County is up 7%, but Pima County is up 7%, and there are a significant effort among Republicans to increase turnout in greater Arizona. But what we have seen is from November 2018 to August 2020, Democrats gained about 40,000 voter registrations on Republicans. Republicans are still ahead by about 100,000, but it has fallen, and that trend speaks to what we're seeing along with the primary numbers as well. Go on to the next one here. Maricopa County is going to be 60%. So I know a lot of you in this community, that's probably not a surprise to you, but it is one of those harsh realities for those sort of in the greater Arizona area, that Maricopa is the dominant force. It is why that we are going to see significant visits. That is why we are the most political spending in the country right now, is because this is ground zero and probably the biggest battleground state we have. But our demographics are shifting, and I've got one little chart here that I think really is instructive when it comes to speaking to the shifting demographics. And on the left side, you'll see Maricopa County 2012 presidential election. Blue is Obama, red is Romney, and then you look at the 2018 Senate race, and you can see that basically around the 101 corridor, and it does take place in the West Valley as well. You see it's going darker blue in the West Valley, but in the northeast and southeast portions of the valley, Ahwatukee, Chandler in particular, in that high-wage corridor, you are seeing a change in the demographics and the change of the voting behavior in there. But what we are also seeing is that in some of these areas, if you look in sort of the Pinal County to the south and Yavapai County to the north, those are getting more red or darker red. So we actually, in a lot of ways, have kind of a microcosm of the country going on, where Maricopa County, Central Maricopa, and Pima County act like our coasts, and then the remainder of the state, or the balance of the state, is sort of the suburbs or the central states like we see in the country. So I think this is hopefully the last one, because I feel like I've been talking forever. But what we look at is the Republicans do tend to dominate midterm elections. It's traditionally a 12-point advantage. It fell to 7 points in 2018. Similarly, they usually have somewhere between a 7 to 9 point advantage in the general elections when the president's on the ballot. We see that falling closer to 3%. So when we talk about the surge, when we talk about the uptick, we're not necessarily saying suddenly it's a 50-50 race. The blue wave is real, the surge is real, but it doesn't mean suddenly Arizona turned a blue state overnight. It's shifting that way, but there's still a ways to go, and that's what's going to make all of these races more competitive.
Do you have any input too, Chad?
I think that was a fabulous presentation. Well, I would say, to the point about this shift, it's funny. We came back from the field with the poll yesterday for one of our ballot measure campaigns we're working on, and we did a sample universe of about a +4 GOP turnout scenario for this year. And I had 3 reporters call me who still couldn't get their head around the fact that a +4 GOP scenario was actually realistic, and I had to convince them of that. But it's a quickly shifting landscape, I think, and a lot of people haven't quite figured that out. So it was kind of eye-opening when the reporters who've been reporting politics for 20 years still can't get their head around the fact that it's going to be this close this cycle.
Yeah, a lot of great data and information here, and seeing that shift and seeing the different, just seeing all the data here is pretty eye-opening, and just seeing where the shifts are happening are pretty neat as well. So now we're going to shift gears and go into the presidential election as well. So both polls, both national and statewide, had Biden leading Trump prior to both party conventions. Pre-convention Arizona polling had Biden leading Trump as well, but we don't know how everything's going to end up. So I'll go to the next slide here, showing each people here. So what's the biggest difference that you guys see here between 2016 and 2020?
Well, again, I'll go back to the poll we just got back with literally yesterday morning. So our polling had Biden up +4, 49-45 as of yesterday. And the growth is probably where you would expect it to be. It's the growth we saw in 2018, the areas that Paul just pointed out for cinema, what we're seeing around the country. It's those suburbs. It's the college-educated women, mainly in suburbs. You're seeing them really turn away from Trump right now in pretty large numbers. That trend hasn't changed much. So it's going to be an interesting election cycle here in Arizona, because I think, theoretically speaking, Arizona could actually be pivotal in establishing who is going to be the next president this time around. And if we have weeks, or pray to God not more than weeks, of a delay in counting that final vote, we are going to be the media focal point for the world for a while, if that really is the case. But I do think that shift is going to hold. The independent women especially seem to be breaking towards Biden still, at least in our polling. I don't know what you have lately. But I think that we're going to see Arizona go blue at the presidential level for the first time since Clinton and what was that, 96, right? I can't remember what year it was. But yeah, so I think it's going to go blue this time around, and it's going to be a big shift in the suburbs. Urban core will hold for Biden, and to Paul's point, rurals will vote heavily Trump, but they're going to get outnumbered by Maricopa and Pima, basically.
So I tend to agree with Chad. I do think anything where you see Biden +4 like that is probably closer to a Biden +1 when you calculate in the shy Trump voter who is not willing to share with any ding-dong person who calls them on their phone their truth of that, who they're going to vote for. So I think it's a neck-and-neck race. I think it's going to be incredibly competitive. The Trump campaign, as we talked about, is very aggressively courting voters in rural Arizona. If you haven't heard already, it was announced today that Trump is going to visit both Tucson and Flagstaff over next week. I think that has less to do because those are both pretty blue areas, but they are adjacent to greater Arizona areas that make it easier for people who might be enthusiastic about the president to come and visit and see him in person. I think this is all about their strategy to run up the score in rural Arizona to hopefully fend off a Maricopa County attack. It's only been done once. Superintendent of Public Instruction Diane Douglas did it. She actually lost Maricopa County but ran up the score in rural enough to win. I think that's sort of the model they're going for right now. But if the trends are trending towards Biden's way, the higher turnout gets, the more likely Biden is to actually take home the prize.
And it's a huge shift historically speaking, kind of building on what Paul just said about running up the score in rural Arizona for Trump and for the GOP in general. Years ago for Democrats, Maricopa County was kind of just a lost cause. You hoped as a Democratic candidate to just mitigate your losses, carry Pima overwhelmingly, and then try to get Flagstaff and some of those other places to help kind of offset the huge loss or the minor loss you did your campaign right in Maricopa. But really, since 2016, Maricopa has been shifting, and we saw that. We did the Penzone race against Arpaio in 2016, and that was the shift. That was beginning. So a lot of people thought we were crazy in 2016 when we started courting that map that Paul showed, that Southeast Valley vote. We went out to the Southeast Valley vote and started talking to suburban women, LDS women, other people out there. And a lot of people thought we were crazy and we thought we were wasting our time. And we ran up the score out there. That was the first shift. And then you saw Sinema solidified in 2018. But, Maricopa now is going to be, unless something changes, I think, Maricopa is going to become more and more of a Democratic place where, just not a stronghold, but fairly Democratic, consistently Democratic. And you're going to have to, as a Republican, continue to try to run outside of Maricopa County and do what the Democrats used to do. It's going to be kind of a flipping of the table, which is, for those of us who've been in politics for a long time here, it's kind of a huge shift still. So,
and for us in the West Valley here, the northwest portions of the district, sort of in the Loop 101 area, South Peoria, those Glendale, those areas. Northwest Phoenix, those are going to change quicker and be more Democratic. Your further out areas, the northern Peoria pieces, the Buckeye pieces, are going to stay more Republican, and I think we'll see more Republican leadership in those areas for longer. But particularly in the West Valley, it's not just the East Valley; it is shifting as well.
Yep.
No, thank you so much. Now hits on my other question about strategies. So thank you. Yeah. That was a lot fresh on people's minds with all the recent debate, and we're obviously seeing all the ads too. So for these two, and then also the next two, which you touched about a little bit, Martha McSally and Mark Kelly. So this is also, like I said, a lot of ad revenue is going into. It seems like every video I watch or social media post I watch, or if I happen to watch TV, there's always one of these on there. So what do you guys think about I guess, this race here? What do they think the chances are? What do you think their strategy should be? And how do you think, because I know the first debate is coming up for these two here shortly as well. So does that help? Does that hurt? What do you guys think?
So if you're sick of political ads, I have terrible bad news for you.
Yeah.
Not only did we have one in 2018 and 2020, but we are going to have a Senate race in 2022 and again in 2024, because the race between McSally and Kelly right now is to fill the remainder of Senator McCain's term. So it is the remaining 2 years of his term. So he would have been up had he survived 2 years from now. So whoever wins this race immediately has to go out and run again. So you're sick of ads now, just wait. You're getting it in 22 and 2024. Mark Kelly fits the mold of the unique, very similar to Senator Sinema, who ran a near flawless campaign 2 years ago, of the type of Democrat that can win Arizona. Arizona is not blue yet. I don't think we are ready for a Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi level progressive candidate to win statewide office here, but I do think candidates like this, particularly with a pedigree like his, can do incredibly well in the state. All of our polling has showed him consistently ahead. We are in the field as well right now and hope to have data next week, and we'll know for sure. But he has been doing better in overall on all of the surveys I've seen compared to Biden on a statewide level. I think it's very difficult. Strategically, one of the things that McSally has not done either 2 years ago or now is frame herself outside of being an Air Force pilot. We get it. You were a pilot. It's great. The people who are benefit of that and like that are with you. The issue is that she has a challenge, I think, when it comes to being likable, particularly with those swing audiences. And that's one of the things that Senator Sinema did very, very well throughout her campaign, made herself likable, made people trust her. I don't think McSally has done that. Mark Kelly has that advantage by being an astronaut. He's got sort of a one leg in the door. My wife is an independent. She's a school teacher. She's also an Army veteran. So she checks a lot of boxes when it comes to like a swing demographic. And the first thing she ever said about Mark Kelly is she says, Mark Kelly, the astronaut, he's a national hero. So that's the bar that McSally has to overcome, whether you like it or not. That's the bar that the opposing campaign has to overcome when attacking somebody like Kelly.
Yeah, I always joke when I was a kid I wanted to be either Spider-Man or an astronaut. I didn't achieve either of those things, but since I get to vote for one now, I'm probably going to vote for that guy. He has that automatic appeal that Paul was pointing out. And I also am married to a registered independent female, so I get every single piece of mail at my house every day. We got, and this is not, we're also in Legislative District 28, if you guys are familiar with that, which is the Cape Brophy-McGee district. So we literally, and this is not a joke, we got 11 pieces of political mail yesterday in our mailbox. So we get everything. So we get all the Kelly stuff, all the McSally stuff, mail, digital, everything. But I do think, to Paul's point, McSally is kind of doing this. In a lot of ways, she's running the same campaign she ran in 2018. And I found that interesting since she lost that race. She came out kind of very negative, stuck to very negative tones. And until recently, with that new ad, she went up, I think, last week before, which is probably the best ad she's ever done, quite frankly. That's the first time she's really tried to actually tell a little bit of a narrative about herself in a way that I think is kind of charismatic and engaging. I think it's probably going to be too little too late, unfortunately, for her. I think Kelly's done a very good job of defining himself, defining kind of how he grew up, the values that set who he is, and the polling shows that. So to the favorability factor, putting aside kind of horse race polling, when you look at favorability, it also gives an indication of how voters feel about people. And we do a lot of that polling on a regular basis. And it's interesting because this entire year, we test these two, we test Biden and Trump, we test Sinema. And every poll we do, we just test favorabilities. Every single poll we do, the most popular person in Arizona is Kyrsten Sinema, hands down. Then after that, it's probably Mark Kelly. Then after that, it's either Biden or Trump. And then it's Ducey. And at the very end, every single time, is Martha McSally. She has not moved that number, at least in any of our polls. I think the gap in terms of voting is closing, but I do think she has that favorability issue, just speaking from a purely analytical standpoint. And I'm not sure she's going to be able to make that up. But saying that, again, that commercial she did, again, went up on air last week before, is I think the best commercial she's done. She's trying to tell her story a little bit more. And I think it's a very engaging commercial. So will that make up some ground and be enough? I don't know. We'll see, but people start voting in a week. So it could be a little too late for her. If I had to predict, again, I'm going to predict a Kelly win. I think it's going to be closer than people think is my gut, but I think he's going to pull it off.
The gap is closing for sure.
Yeah, definitely. No doubt about it.
Definitely. But the challenge with all campaigns, and if you ever want to be a candidate, one thing to bear in mind is
don't ever be a candidate. I'll just put that out there. I'm going to throw that out there now. Word of advice, don't ever be a candidate.
But if you're ever thinking about it, or if you're ever watching a campaign, the thing to bear in mind is when you attack a person and you're attacking your opponent, that doesn't help your number. It just brings their number down. It does not bring your number commensurately up, okay? You actually have to give people a reason to vote for you, not just against your opponent. And that's why you're starting to see a shift in a lot of the messaging for campaigns is you have to give people a reason to feel comfortable with voting for you. If you just attack your opponent, people tend to turn off and stay home. So you have to give them an actual reason to vote for you. So that's finally McSally did that. I think that's a challenge that she suffered from in both races, that you need to establish a predicate of what to be for before you start going after your opponent.
Thank you so much, for that as well. So we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we'll talk briefly about these two initiatives, because we're going to talk about these initiatives later as well. But the two, so Invest in Ed and Smart and Safe. So first, define what they are for everybody who doesn't know what they really are, and then what you think the likelihood of those two passing, the pros and cons, and any other thoughts that you might have on it.
Since you're working on
Yeah, so full disclosure, I'm working on both of these campaigns, so I will disclose that. I want to make sure everybody knows that. Briefly, I'm sure most of you are familiar with these at this point, so I don't want to spend too much time on what they do. The Invest in Ed ballot measure raises the income tax on individuals making over $250,000 a year. On that additional money on top of that, not the money below that $250 mark, but money on top of that, or married couples making over $500,000 a year, again, the money on top of that. And then that money goes to education, K-12 funding. On the Smart and Safe side, pretty straightforward, legalizing recreational adult use marijuana for people 21 years of age and older. Does some decriminalization aspects of it, and some criminal justice expungement for previous convictions. Those two, Invest in Ed, Smart and Safe, a similar effort was ran in 2016. When I say similar, just in terms of trying to legalize this product, a vastly different ballot measure that I was not involved in, and it barely lost. And you probably all know the ongoing debate around K-12 funding in this state, both legislative battles, ballot measure battles, referendum battles. We've been doing this now for 10, 12 years. So this is kind of the culmination, I think, and the voters are going to have a say now. So that's what these two things do. And then I know we'll talk about kind of predicting where it's going to head. So I'll kick it back to Paul to start that off.
Sure. I think one of the things that we've seen is education funding has been the top issue facing the state of Arizona for the past 6 years. People still believe that our schools are dramatically underfunded, even after Prop 123 and even after the governor's 20 by 2020 plan. And more than 78% of the electorate think that teachers are underpaid, despite the 20% increase in teacher pay. So there is an appetite for education funding out there. The question comes down to is this the way that the voters want to pay for it? The benefit for a lot of those folks will be that they'll never pay it. And so getting somebody else to pay, to some is very attractive, to others that, there's people that would like a more equitable approach that more people pay for. So I think that that's the debate that's going on. I do think, and no offense to Chad, I do think both sides of this issue have missed the mark when it comes to communicating it. I think they've devolved into a finger-pointing battle of who did and didn't fund what, and who is good guy and bad guy, and how long ago people served in office. And I think that there is an easy way to discuss education that I think is critically important. And I've been in front of your group and others before talking about why education investment is important, and that comes to building our future workforce, it comes to attracting jobs and economic opportunities, and it comes to protecting our quality of life. People want to live near excellent schools. Those are things that are sort of universal messaging when it comes to education funding that either side could have used more effectively, I think, to talk about this issue. Ultimately, though, based on the fact that I think there's an appetite for education funding, I think that it is more likely to pass than not. There's been about $3 million spent against it. So I haven't seen any numbers on it lately, so it'll be closer than I think people would think. But That's one of the ones, depending on where the increased voter turnout is, that's something that people look at. They'll make a snap judgment. There's not a lot of awareness from lower efficacy voters. Do you want to talk about that one, or should I do the marijuana?
No, go for it, and I can respond to both.
Okay, great. Smart and safe, on the other hand, I do think that long-term, whether it's this year or 2 years from now or 4 years from now, the trend nationally and locally is that recreational marijuana will eventually be legalized. I think they did a much better job this time around than they did 4 years ago, particularly when it comes to keeping children safe, as well as the marketing of gummy products and other candy. The ban on candy is a big issue that was very exposed last time around, as well as the no smoking in public. I don't have to like what they're proposing to see when people are doing a good job writing it. So I think that they did a much better job in making a more palatable approach this time around. And despite one poll last week that said that it was in trouble, despite being ahead, every other data point I've seen on this thing bodes based on the high voter turnout. If we have 79 voter turnout, Smart and Safe Arizona will pass this year.
Yeah, and I'll go backwards. I'll start with Smart and Safe, then go back to Invest in Ed. And we just came out of the field with the poll yesterday on Smart and Safe. With high turnout modeling, we had it as about 57%. The poll that did come out last week that showed us with a very, very close margin in terms of a lead was based on a very low turnout scenario. I think as Paul and I both reiterated today, I can't imagine a low turnout scenario this year. We've been tracking this thing since we started this campaign, which was in essence 2 years ago. And our polling has been consistent throughout, either low 60s, mid to high 50s. So we feel pretty confident about this one. I don't ever want to feel confident about anything in this election environment right now. But as confident as I can feel about anything, that's how I feel about Smart and Safe. And again, I'm not here to advocate for it today. But to Paul's point, it's a vastly different ballot measure than what the other group tried to run in 2016. And I think the voters do recognize that. I think the business community recognizes that. We have a lot of business protections in there. All these things are missing in 2016. So I think that's what's making the difference this time around. On the Invest in Ed side, to Paul's point, I think that it's going to be close. I do think that it's going to pass. I think the lack of investment in K-12 funding over the years has caught up to the people who haven't made the decisions to fund K-12, and I think voters are frustrated. When putting this together, we weren't involved in that process by any means in terms of writing language of this one, as we were in Smart and Safe. But I will say they looked at a lot of variables and a lot of different ways to fund education. And when you look at the electorate here in Arizona, the one thing that's just untouchable is property taxes. You cannot pass a statewide property tax here. It's a no-go. People move here because they don't want to pay property taxes. That's one of the attractive things about Arizona. And a lot of people propose that would be a better way to fund education, but it's just politically a non-starter. It's not going to happen. And we have, as you all know, we have very high sales tax rates, some of the highest in the country. And so, quite frankly, the income tax is really the only place you can go to raise money around this issue. At least that's the hypothesis of the people who wrote this ballot measure. And it was very well tested with a lot of different research and focus groups and polling. But, tax hikes are always tough in Arizona. We all know that. But again, going back to these changing trends, and going to be the continuing theme throughout the rest of this conversation here for the next few minutes, I think that blue surge, as Paul likes to call it, I think is what's going to carry this one over the finish line at the end of the day.
So one thing to note as leaders in the West Valley in particular, but across the state, is that these were both issues that could have been addressed by the legislature, and in some ways should have been. There's other issues like this. When they don't get addressed, they get dealt with via initiative. And initiatives are voter protected, that they cannot be changed without another vote of the people. So one of the things that you should constantly encourage your leaders, and as leaders yourselves, to think about is that if you don't want to be locked into a particular thing and vote on it in this methodology, encourage your legislators in particular to address these at the legislature instead of being done at the ballot box.
That's an excellent point. And that leads me right into our next slide here, which is the state level. So some of the down ballots, some of the other type of races that are going within some of our districts. This is this LD4 here. So just what you think the shots are of different candidates compared to previous years, and just where you think they're leaning, especially with the Democrat, the shift and the surge and things like that.
So LD4 does include part of this area, so that's why it's, I mean, of the ones that we're going to talk about, this is one to pay attention to. I also think, as I'm sure many of you are aware, but our state legislature right now, the Senate is 1614 and the House is 3129. So all it takes is one change in the House or two seat changes in the Senate for Democrats to take control for the first time since basically 1990. It was, the last time it was tied, the Senate was tied in 2002, I believe it was. So there is a chance that one or both houses might shift, and that's why this has been an area of interest for some folks. LD4 is the one place Republicans are really looking at. They'll argue there's others, but one that there's a pickup here because there was a pretty significant fall off between. This is a heavily Democratic district, by the way, but there was a fall off between the two candidates. Fernandez got about 4,000 more votes than her seatmate, and this is a place that Republicans look at a candidate like Joel John, who's bilingual, is a school teacher, and others, and think they might have a chance to pick up a seat in this race. I know there's money and emphasis on this one. We're going to talk about several races. This is the one that most likely has a Republican pickup out of them, and I know people are starting to pay attention to it. But this is a heavy lift for Republicans.
Yeah, again, to Paul's point, I mean, this is the only district I can see flipping the Republicans' way this time around, and I still think it's a very, very big long shot. This district does have, historically speaking, a fairly low performance for Democrats in the primary. So I think that gap that was seen between Fernandez and Peden in the primary will probably close in the general election, is my guess.
Okay, thank you. And then the next one here, and just LD6, if I remember right, this is Flagstaff and Greater Arizona, Greater Phoenix, or Greater Flagstaff area. So this is a really rural, and then
down to Rem country, and yep, Flag and Rem country, yep.
All right. So we have state, Senate, and House. So what do you guys thoughts of these right here?
So I don't know where Paul's going to land on this one, but this is one that the Democrats have been looking at now for the past two cycles really heavily. I think in the House in particular, some of the mistakes Democrats have made they've really been not running candidates from the Flagstaff area, quite frankly. The Democrats tried to recruit candidates from more of the rural parts of the district, which really isn't their strong suit up there. The Democratic base is really in Flagstaff, parts of the Sedona area that comes in this district. Coral Evans is the mayor of Flagstaff. She's very popular up there. I think that this will be the year the Democrats flip a seat in this chamber. Art Babbitt is an independent. That is kind of the wild card. Nobody can figure out exactly how that's going to shape up, and Paul may have some numbers on that. And it's interesting because he has the Babbitt last name, but it's not the same Babbitt family a lot of us Arizonans know about it. It's spelled differently, but a lot of people still remember the Babbitt name and think he may be part of the Babbitt family. But it'll be interesting to see if he cuts into her votes at all or takes away from her votes. But ultimately, I think that Coral will probably sneak through. I don't know which one of the two Republican incumbents will lose, but I think that she will sneak through. And then on the Senate side, the interesting thing is Wendy Rogers beat Sylvia Allen, the longtime senator up there. I think that had Sylvia Allen won, I think the Republicans would have held on to this seat. Felicia French is a really good candidate, though, military vet. She barely lost last time in the House race last cycle. I think that she'll win now. I do. Without Sylvia on the ballot, I think that she can beat Wendy. And there is a ton of money going to these races up here. And the Democratic candidates are outraising the Republicans. Last I saw, I think it was 3-1, if not more. So it's heading a Democratic way up there. It's a rural districts in a lot of areas, so it's going to be very close. And again, with this one, I can't predict anything with certainty, but I would say that probably you're going to have a House seat flip and the Senate flip for the Ds this time in LD6.
So if you want to talk to political insiders and sound smart, say, well, but what about LD6? Because that'll be, there's a ton of money and a lot of people paying attention to LD6. Sylvia Allen defeated her opponent 2 years ago by only 1,700 votes. Felicia French just got 6,000 more votes in the primary than her counterpart got 2 years ago. Wendy Rogers, the perennial candidate who's run several times in this area in Tempe and others and lost, is of concern of Republicans and not me. This is not me saying this. This is Republicans I talk to are concerned about this seat. So that's number one. Number two, Art Babbitt is a longtime Cochise County supervisor. Coconino, my bad. Coconino County supervisor. He's very well known, actually owns the farmers market up there. And so he actually has a chance to be competitive in this race. I'm not as bullish on the House seat. I do think that Republicans potentially lose a House seat here, but I think there's a chance that they lose it to Babbitt because Walt Blackman got about 26,000 votes in the primary. Brenda Barton got 17. So that's a 10,000 vote differential between the two. When you see candidates not earn the same amount in an uncontested primary, that's usually a harbinger of something that is wrong. And so when asked of the two who's likely to not survive, I would put my money on Barton right now.
Oh, thank you. All right, now LD 17. I'm not exactly sure where LD 17. That's more East Valley.
Southeast Valley. Yep.
Chandler Gilbert.
Yep.
Chandler Gilbert. All right. It's the same thing here. Mesnard and.
Oh, okay. So this is one to look at because J.D. Mesnard was the former Speaker of the House, and he was also the sponsor of several of the pieces of legislation when it comes to school vouchers and some other issues that some of the more Democratic community has really focused in on. So they have put a target on him. This district is not shifting as much as people would hope. But the thing to bear in mind is that 2 years ago, Democrats picked up 4 seats in the House. One of the seats they picked up was one of the House seats on this side in LD 17, because it is a higher income area, it is a higher education attainment area, Intel's in the community, it is part of that shifting blue demographic that I was talking about. So people think they have a chance there. This one I'm less bullish on than some of the other ones, but if the Democrats take out a former Speaker of the House, that's why this one's on the list.
Yeah, I think that JD holds on to this seat, but the surprising thing was the primary numbers. AJ got a lot of votes in the primary, and to Paul's point, the Dems did take a seat on the House side of this district last time around, and actually was the leading vote getter. Jennifer Pollock was the leading vote getter in that race last time. So it's interesting. All I will say is if the Dems take this seat, that is pretty much a guarantee the Dems will control the Senate in my eyes. If this seat flips and the Dems have the Senate, that's how I look at this district.
Cool. And then LD 20, is that North Peoria?
No, it's the sort of northwest Phoenix area.
Okay.
It is kind of near the Loop 101. It bleeds into some Glendale and stuff. Right?
Yeah. Yep.
This is one of those shifting demographic ones. You want to talk about?
Yeah, again, this is, like Paul just said, it's Northwest Phoenix area, suburbs, working class. It's that trending demographic kind of away from the Republicans, looking for some of those more moderate Democratic type candidates. I will say there's a lot of money going in this district. I'll start with that. And I think that, again, with the Dems only single-shotting one person, and Judy Schwiebert on the House side, they have a pretty decent chance of picking off one of these seats on the House side. Now, would it be Kern or Bullock? If I had to bet, I was going to say it'd be Kern. I think Kern has a lot of challenges in terms of votes and some other things in his past that have been brought up. So, again, this is one of those seats, and I'll say, like I said, for the 17 Senate seat, if this House seat flips for the Dems, the House probably flips to the Dems. I think this is kind of the canary in the coal mine for the Republicans here in some ways. On the Senate side, there's a lot of more people excited about this on the D side than I would say they should be. Doug Urban ran last time and ran a good campaign, a good candidate. Paul Boyer's a good candidate too, has a lot of support, very well known. I don't see the Senate side flipping to D control our D seat. I know some people say it could, but I don't predict that at all.
This was traditionally supposed to be a swing district based on registration and never has been because Republicans dominate it. So the reason this one's on the list is because suddenly a bunch more Democrats participated in the primary than we'd ever seen before, which bodes for a more competitive than usual race. This is one that I don't think the Senate's on the list at all. I know there's a lot of money on the House side, but they're not, the money is on the House side. It has not really overflowed onto the Senate side much.
Great. And now LD 21, that's East Valley.
Nope.
No?
Nope.
Yeah, it's Northwest Valley again.
Northwest? Okay.
Yeah, Peoria area. Yep.
Peoria, El Mirage, not all the way North Peoria, but this is our neck of the woods, depending on how far northwest you go. This is sort of the Peoria, El Mirage area. Kathy Connect ran as an independent 2 years ago and made a much more competitive showing than I think a lot of people thought she would. She's running as a Democrat this time. This is a heavy lift. This district is plus 15 Republican advantage. It's one of the ones that I think there's a lot of aspiration going on that this might be one to flip with Connect as the candidate there. We'll have to see on this. I know it's one to watch. Both Payne and Pingarelli were neck and neck, each with 16,000, basically almost 17,000 votes, almost identical vote count. As I said before, it's one of the things when you look for a split, that's where someone can wedge in. This one I think is a lot less likely. This is my bellwether. If this one goes, that means that the Democrats have dominated this election. This one I think is a toss-up, but I tend to lean towards the incumbents because some of the other races we looked at so far have an open seat. This is one of them that does, but compared to some of the other open seats, I think this one's a little more stable.
Yeah, I would agree with Paul. I mean, if this one flips, then the House, again, this is almost a guarantee at that point the House flips. I will say, though, I think that Connect has a better chance than what some people think. She's a very strong candidate, and again, you only have one incumbent running the R side, so that presents a little bit of an opportunity for her there. We'll see. This one will be all about turnout, and if the Dems do come out in huge numbers and you have those independent women break towards Connect, that'd be the pathway to victory for her right there.
Just there's only so much turnout to go around.
Agreed.
Now,
Yeah.
And the problem is you look at some of the other areas that the emphasis is. All the intel I got about that district is there's just not enough people to make this turnout work up there.
It'd have to be a huge independent break to her. I agree 100%.
And I'm not sure where this district is, 28.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's my home district.
Okay.
So, so if you're all familiar with this one, this is kind of central Phoenix corridor, going a little bit northeast Paradise Valley area, and then kind of north of Paradise Valley area. This is a district that 10 years ago was a pretty strong, or maybe 12 years ago was a strongly Republican district. It started to flip in the late 2000s when I was in the legislature, actually. And we got one House member that became a Democrat, then eventually both House members became a Democrat. And now it's pretty solidly, the House is pretty much locked up by the Dems. And the Senate's been where the Republicans have held on to the seat, mainly because Kate Murphy-McGee is an incredibly strong candidate and has good crossover appeal. But I like Kate, I served with Kate, but I will have to say I think that she's probably going to lose this time around. Christine Marsh is running again. She ran last time, barely lost. She's a former Teacher of the Year. She's very, she fits the mold of what a lot of people are looking for right now, especially around the education issues that Paul talked about, and just the changing demographic. The district is becoming more and more Democratic, and there's a ton of money going in this district. I can't stress that enough. Like I said, we get everything at my house because my wife is the unicorn in politics, independent female, and it's going to be close. But Kate's barely survived the past two cycles, and I do think that Christine will probably beat her this time around. And I think this is going to be, this combined with another Senate seat flip will end up making the tie in the Senate, which is what I think will happen.
Kate Murphy-McGee only won by 267 votes 2 years ago. And Christine Marsh just got 27,000 votes in the primary. Kate got 23,000. So there's 4,000 more Democrats that voted in the primary than Republicans. So the cards are stacked against her, but never count Kate Murphy-McGee out. She's the best. She will be, whether it's this time or in the future, she will be the last Republican to represent this district because of the shifting demographics. It's very similar to what happened in the Ahwatukee area, just based on things that are changing. Now, the thing to note, though, is that this is the last year of these districts. We will be in redistricting. They will all change. And so we'll have a whole new set of races to look at and a whole new set of demographics to look at. But this is not surprising that the demographics of 10 years ago are not the same demographics that you have now. The property values in this district have gone up significantly. I mean, Chad moved in there, so that tells you everything you need.
I didn't bring him down, actually, when I moved in there. I don't know what happened.
Now you wanted to be near the, but I mean, ultimately what it comes down to is that this is one of the areas that changed and is competitive, and it's one of, the thing I have trouble with is that Democrats are claiming that this is just a foregone conclusion, that they've won this race. I don't believe that. No. You got it. This is why they play the game. Yep. This is why the Cardinals had to play the Lions, because, at the end of the day, just because you assume an outcome is going to happen, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. This is one of the places that might be surprising.
Yeah, agreed. Again, like I said, Kate Murphy-McGee is one of the hardest campaigners around, and I would never say this is a sure thing by any stretch of the imagination. But again, if I had to predict, I think that Christine's going to pull it off this time. I think the Democratic demographics are just too strong for Kate to overcome this time around. And based on the primary numbers alone, like Paul pointed out, that's a huge gap in a district like this.
So that's very informative. Thank you for that as well. And then the next one is really just high level, state Senate, where you think those are going to end up, the state House. I know you already touched on these as well. You only have to take one or two in both sides really to flip it because we're so close as a state. We're very moderate or just very close. So overall, without that being said, I guess what do you think the overall prediction is for the state and the House, the Senate and the House?
Well, Chad already said he thinks the Senate's going to be tied.
So I think the Senate's going to tie, and I think 28, I think, again, my district, the Kate Murphy-McGee seat, is going to flip. I think that'll be the first seat. And I mentioned it early on, the LD6 race up north. I think had Sylvia Allen won that seat, the Republicans probably would have held on to it. But I think with Wendy Rogers up there, it's a tougher road for them. Felicia's been campaigning really nonstop for 3 years now. And so I think she'll flip that seat, and that'll lead to a tie. Then the big question is, if you have an outlier, again, like LD17 in the East Valley, with some, AJ beating JD out there somehow, which again, I don't think will happen, but isn't completely off the chart possibility. If that were to happen, then you see the flip. But my guess is you'll have a tie in the Senate.
So my bold and fun prediction is I think both are going to be tied. I think that's
don't say that.
That's so 2020. That's about as 2020 as you could get is for both chambers to be tied. And, I mean, it is the ideal. I mean, I wouldn't have ever expected we had a presidential debate where two people shouted over each other the entire time. So that being said, I just think that we're looking at, my big, bold prediction is that both of them end up tied.
And I want to point out that is literally a nightmare scenario for so many reasons. I'm going to say I think the House flips. I think it's going to be 31-29. It's going to be the exact opposite of what it is now. Again, I think LD6 flips, and I think you have probably LD20 or LD21, one of those seats goes probably LD20. There's a couple super outlier districts we didn't talk about today too that could flip, but I don't believe that. But I do think it will flip. But I assume then you're saying you think LD6 will flip to the Ds, so that'll lead to the tie right there basically. That's the only district that flips is what you're saying on the House side probably.
I'm saying LD6 flips in the Senate.
Okay.
The question is maybe if Babbitt becomes the I who he's caucus with, which might also be a tie. So.
Yeah, and I do think, that's a good point. A tie in both chambers will be a horrific nightmare for all of us. I just want to point that out. So no matter what party you belong to.
Compromise.
Is there a third in our state? Is there someone is the tiebreaker?
It's called Survivor at that point, basically. It'll be cutting backroom deals, making who's going to be the speaker, who's going to be the president, who has committee chairs, who will be the chair of probes, like all these things. And if you have both chambers doing that, there's going to be a lot of games being played.
That's what typically happens. The majority party picks those usually, right?
Yeah, I mean, normally when you have the majority party control, they pick who the leader is of the chamber, the Senate president or the Speaker of the House. They have the committee chairs. They really. I mean, it's not a democracy, really, in essence. It's the Speaker of the House, the Senate President control everything, as long as they don't upset their own caucus or they get ousted by their own caucus. But, the majority party controls how the chamber functions, who runs which committees, all those assignments. So if you have a tie, you're going to have a person, maybe two people, three people, who knows, trying to run for that top position, and they're going to have to figure out how to get votes from the other side to break that stalemate. And that will mean a lot of games being played. And in terms of policy, actually, to Paul's point, it probably would be good to have some compromise. I'm not saying that. I was just being kind of facetious. From that whole aspect of that part of the game, it'll just be a virtual nightmare watching them try to figure that out.
I mean, in 2002, when the Senate was split, they had even number of members on both sides in every committee.
Yep.
So then you could have things not come out of committee because of a tie vote over and over, which could be a disaster. That'd be some tough stuff.
Yep. It'll be a 2020 outcome no matter what happens, basically, is how I look at it. So.
No, great. Thank you so much. And I think we still have time for questions, Michelle. One question? Okay. Who has the one question? No pressure. Better be a really good question. No. Okay. Any questions? All right.
No pressure.
No pressure.
So was there any pressure to keep Martha McSally from running? Because I was concerned when she ran because she already lost to Kirsten Sinema. Why did the Republican Party think she would do any better against Kelly?
Boy, you start with that one.
All right. I have to be the Republican whisperer on this. I think your point is well taken that there were folks that had concerns about that. I think at the same time, there were people that believed because she had just run and there was nobody with better name ID. And for all those, I mean, name ID is a fancy word that just means people who know your name, that can recall it. And that takes time to build that up. And they had just spent over $10 million putting Martha McSally's name out in front of anybody. And so short of like Ducey, there's not a ton of other Republicans that have sort of that recall. And so the amount of money that would have been needed to be spent to build somebody up like that seemed very difficult. And with the passing of Senator McCain, in addition to that, I think it just made it very difficult. There's a lot of people who questioned that appointment, but there's also, I think the bigger thing was the assumption was made that if she were to run again, that she might have other people help her frame her campaign and her issues. And it does not, by and large, seem like she's done that. And she's very much ran almost the same campaign that she ran last time around, didn't, really change courses until a couple of weeks ago. And so I think that's been the bigger challenge than the beginning of this thing.
Cool. Well, with that, thank you so much to Paul and Chad.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's always very informative. One of my favorite things is the league, and I always appreciate the knowledge and the data and just what's going on out there and just the strategies and things like that. So I appreciate your insights and how we think the Senate is everything's gonna end up in November here really soon. So
we probably won't know until December, actually.
Yeah. Or December. Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
So, I know it's time's up. Let me give you one piece of advice. Mail your ballot and mail your ballot soon, because any campaign worth its salt will leave you alone. Once they know that you voted, they'll stop mailing you, they'll stop calling you, they'll stop bothering you. So if you've made up your mind, vote your ballot, because then you'll be left alone. And also recognize that any ballot that's dropped off at a polling place there's not prevailing voter fraud in the state of Arizona. Any ballot that's dropped off, it's not because it's fraudulent, it's because people took the time to drop it off at a polling place. It takes some time to open those ballots, to count them, and make sure that because those voters have every right, just like we do, to vote. So we're going to have hundreds of thousands of ballots left to count, so it's going to take a while, so buckle up, because Chad's right.
And just like the Martha and Sinema.
Right.
Yeah. We thought one, and then they counted everything, and it was fairly close. So it took time.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah, it will. It'll be a fun end to 2020 here as we're skating through. So once again, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.